Hello guys, so we're going to talk about typography today. So I have typography. There's a whole other lesson that we could talk about as far as what is typography, and in terms of web design, you are kind of limited in the amount of choices you have initially. Now, however, technology has come a long way where we can include specialized fonts into each of our website designs. Years ago, we didn't have that option. We only had like a few choices to choose from, and any specialized fonts that we had to include, we had to include them as graphics in their designs. So I'm just going to kind of go through what typography is for each of the websites. So, why does type matter? Well, typography and all elements of design can have the greatest effect on the success or failure of a piece of communication. If you use a certain font, let's say, for instance, let's say Comic Sans. Comic Sans is just a regular kind of like crayon drawn font that is used a lot for like comic books or children's type of books or whatever. The idea of using that, which is often, it's actually gotten to the point where somebody looks at that font, they instantly start thinking of it as an amateur design. And try applying that to, let's say, a healthcare. The type of communication we want to give to like healthcare is more or less kind of like a clean, modern type of font. You want to include structure. You want to include kind of like a safety element within it. And Comic Sans just does not do that with healthcare. So you want to choose fonts that relate to that particular business. If, let's say, you're selling skateboards, maybe you go for more of a grunge type of font for it. But each of those fonts have a different characteristic that it communicates to the viewer, different psychological thought process. So we're going to talk about this, and you can kind of see with this particular font, it's nice. All right, what it does is it kind of like, it's very grunge type of font, but it doesn't go overly like grunge. So it has this dirty type of aspect, but it also mixes in some of the modern kind of like theatrical type of thought process. Another one here, again, very, very true to the era, are these types of fonts here. All right, so it's a very, very it's an old font, but it's very, very showbiz-like. All right, so you kind of see that that resembles what it's trying to do. So, for instance, this is a website development company, but it does art stuff, but it looks like it's trying to hold to a certain characteristic. All right, types of web type. So what we're dealing with is there's images within type. All right, if you have a very specialized font that is you just cannot make into a web font, you can include it with an image. All right, images of type. You got web safe type, which are some of the fonts that you don't need to do anything with. Those still hold true, like for instance, Arial, or Times New Roman, or Georgia, or Verdana. All right, those are fonts that are typically on every computer in the world. So that will come up. So when a site comes up, it looks at for that particular font, and it will replace it with that font. All right, so that is why it's like web safe. There's also what is called font replacement and embedding, where we can specifically tell all fonts in a particular site to change to a certain typeface. And I'm going to show you a site that can kind of help with that, to include specific fonts that you can use. All right, so the image type, which are images of type and enable the designer to match exactly branding requirements for a client. So it's like like I said, if you have a certain font that you use for a particular logo, like let's say you've tweaked the logo somehow to not include the bar and the A, well, obviously there's going to be no font that's going to do that. So you can actually include that as an image. You don't want to do that if you can avoid it, but that is also a possibility. So like here, for instance, it's like no font's going to do that. If you're going with something even more unique, you can include the font in there, or you can include graphics that have fonts kind of made up like that. Same thing here. All right. Web-safe type is a choice of font that is consistent on the user's computer, which is, again, like I said, like Arial, Georgia, Verdana, all these different typefaces that are consistent on every computer in the world that you can actually, that are brought up and can be used. All right. So, for instance, I think this one actually is Georgia. Georgia font. It's a consistent font when it's being used on every computer, so you don't have to include any kind of like bells and whistles in order to replace that font on the actual page, on the actual site. All right. Another one, I think that may be Arial. So you can kind of see the different font faces that are in there. Very sans serif-like, very consistent throughout. There's font replacement and embedding, which is font replacement is emerging as a way to give designers most typographic flexibility with their designs. So imagine you use a particular font, and you'd like to use that font through the entire site. But if you have live text, which is text that you can actually select or it moves depending on how the screen size is, it was hard for years ago to do that. Well, now there's technology out there that can replace fonts, and I'll show you one here shortly. All right, so again, you can have a site that has a particular font that is used consistently through it, but you can also make it very, very unique. Same thing here. All right. So what is that font I was talking about, or what does that say I was talking about? Ironically, it's Google. All right, it's fonts.google.com, and what that does is it has over 1,000 fonts on its system. So what does this do? Well, with Google Fonts, they are copyright free. So the fonts you use here can actually be used throughout several design projects for free. All right, they're fonts given to you to use however you see fit. You don't have to worry about copyright issues. You don't have to worry about anything like that. But the real intriguing area is that these fonts can be used on websites. So how do you do that? Well, here's a very popular one called Open Sans. If I click on that, all right, it will show me each of the fonts here and the glyphs and all that stuff. It'll talk about who the designer is and the license and all that kind of jazz. Right? So you can see them, you can download them. You can download the whole entire family you want. All right? So, but the thing I want to point out is if I were to say select this style, all right, what it does is throws like a side menu. So when you deal with getting into programming, you can put in code that will tell all fonts on a particular page or a particular site to change to Open Sans. But that is referred to right here as using on the web. To embed a font, copy the code into the head of the HTML, and we'll talk about that later on in the semester. But you would replace this, put that line of code into your head tag of your website. And then while using style sheets, you can actually incorporate and tell, okay, all fonts, pretty much all fonts is going to be Open Sans, sans serif. So you can see that you can actually embed these types of fonts throughout your entire site. And all it does is it connects right to Google, and it brings that font style over to your website and replaces all the fonts with it. It's a very unique and very easy method of incorporating fonts that you can use. So what's nice is that you can, even from this page, you can go to download all, and you can actually install all the fonts onto your computer and use them in your designs. So, which is nice because if you're building a corporate identity for a certain client, you can build a logo and use Open Sans, but you can also use Open Sans in a brochure, in a newspaper ad, trade publication ad, and you can also now bring it over to your website and make everything consistent. All right, so I'm going to stop right there. So we're talking enough about type today. So than that, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.